In this tutorial, we're going to show you how to create the components for the Magic Beans coffee sign you see on your screen. The vectors used in this example were created in a previous tutorial, which you can access through the related video section on this page. We're going to cover how to create components using the 2-rail sweep and the Create Shape tool. And we're also going to look at how to create components from a bitmap to create a texture. So let's start now by going to File, Close. We'll start now by opening an existing file. And from the project folder, we've got the Magic Beans coffee sign.crv. So if we click to open that up, and there you'll see all of the vectors that we created in the previous vector drawing tutorial. Now, before we look at modeling our part, we're just going to review our job setup. So we'll come over to File Operations and go into the Set Job Dimensions and Origin. And once we're in the form, we can just quickly glance over our settings just to make sure they're correct. But the only part I'm actually interested in here is this bottom section. So the modelling resolution at the moment is set to standard, and you'll see underneath that it's displaying 1 million points. So because we're going to be working with relief models here, I'm going to increase that to very high, and you'll see that that's now changed to 4 million points. So we're really maximising the resolution there. Under material settings, we'll just click to open this. Our appearance, we want the material to be Canadian maple, so we'll just find that in the list. And we'll click to select that and click out. And now that's done, we can click OK to exit the form. So next we're going to look at tiling our window. So we'll go up to this icon here to arrange views vertically. And now we can see the 2D view displayed on the left and the 3D view displayed on the right. So that when we start to create components, we'll see them displayed in the 3D view here. And to access the modelling tools, we need to come over to the Modelling tab. And here you'll see that we've got all of the tools that we need to create and edit components. So we're going to start by looking at the base shapes for our sign, but before we do that, we're going to look at arranging our component tree. As we know that we're going to be working with quite a lot of components here, so we'll organise this now so that it makes sense to us later on. And first of all, I'm going to start by renaming level 1. So I'm going to right click on it, and we're going to go down to rename level. And we're going to name this base, and click off to accept that, so that now any components that we create are going to be added to this base level. And now we're ready to start looking at creating the base shape for our sign. So to do that, we're going to be using the 2-rail sweep function. And this can be found under the modelling tools, and we'll see here the second icon across, create a shape by sweeping between 2 rail vectors. And that'll open the 2-rail sweep form, which allows you to select 2 vectors to be used as drive rails, and then a profile vector to be swept between them to create the profile that you're looking for. So in our example, we're going to use this outer vector here, and we're going to hold down shift and select the inner border vector, and then we're going to come over to the 2-rail sweep form and we're going to click use selection. And after doing that, you'll see that these vectors have now changed colour. So the software's converted these into drive rails. So we have a red rail here and we have a green rail here. And also we'll note that these are both travelling in the same direction. So you can see through these directional arrows. And this is good because it means that the profile will be swept in the same direction between the 2 rails. And now all we need to do is just select our cross section. So for that, I'm going to use this vector here. So I'm going to click to select that. And we're just going to assign that to our start point. So to do that, we'll see this green point here. So with that selected, we can just click to place that. And you'll see that that's now been assigned to our start point. But at the moment, the start point for the internal border vector is all the way down here on the right hand side. So we just need to move this in line with the start point for the external border. And to do this, we can just right click underneath the other start point on the internal vector. And we can scroll down and select make start point. So you'll see that those 2 are now in line. And we can just click again just to reassign that vector to the start point. And now all that we need to do to see the effect of sweeping our cross section between our 2 drive rails is to click apply. So in the 2-rail sweep form, we'll come down and we'll select apply. So if we just do that now, and you'll see in the 3D view that the software has created a component with a profile that's based on this vector here being swept between these 2 drive rails. Now if we just pan and zoom into this component here, you'll see that as the profile's been swept between these 2 drive rails, into the corners, we're presented with a bit of a problem. And the profile appears to be twisted as it's swept across these areas. And the reason for this is because the profile is starting at the same point on both of the individual rails, and the internal border is much smaller than the external corner. As it sweeps into these corners, it's actually becoming stretched between the two rails as if they're out of sync. Now, a good way to help you visualize this is to imagine that each side of the cross section is a race car and they're both racing each other around the racetrack. So we have a red car on the red track and a green car on the green track. Now, the red car is going to have to travel a lot faster than the green car around the track so that they both meet back up at the start point at the same time. And so to help us with that, we can look at applying a cross section at each one of these corners. So we'll remember from when we created these vectors that they both have the same number of nodes. So all we have to do is to right click on that start point and choose the option at the bottom, add to all rail nodes. And once you've selected that, you'll see that the cross section has been applied to all corners where we have a node. Okay, so when I go ahead and click apply again, you'll see that we've now got nice mitered corners. And that's looking great now, so I'll put that back in Z. And the next thing that we need to do is just to fill this area in the middle with flat material. And to do that, we have this option in the 2-rail sweep form to fill center of inner closed vector rails. And that will fill this area up to the height of the vector used for the cross section, so the maximum height of this leg here. And that will be this point here. Okay, so I'll just go back to full view on the 2D view. And we've got that option selected there now. We're not going to scale this to an exact height because we want it to the height of the cross section. And I'm just going to go ahead and give this a name. So we'll call this one base. And we can click apply. And you can see now that it's created the base shape of the sign for us. So that was just a brief overview of the 2-rail sweep tool, but if you'd like to learn more about it, then I'd recommend watching the 2-rail sweep guide tutorial, which you can find in the related video section on this page. And with that done, we can close out of the 2-rail sweep form, and we're now going to look at making some recess shapes in our base. And to do that, we're going to be using the Create Shape tool under Modeling Tools. So we're going to select this vector here, and holding down Shift, we're also going to select the inner vector. And now we just need to think about our profile and the various other parameters that we can set to control the shape between these two vectors. Okay, so in this case, I'd like to set an angled profile. So I'll select that. And we're going to set an angle in this box here of 60 degrees. So I'll just type that in. And moving down, we don't need a base height in this case. And the final height, in this case, we actually want to limit the height. So I'll select the second option. And I want to limit the height this time to 1/2 inch. So I'll type in 0.5. Okay, so we've chosen to create a shape with an angle of 60 degrees. And then once it gets to 1/2 inch in height, it will flatten off. Okay, so just to preview that, we can come down and click apply. That will commit the component, which you can see represented in the 2D and the 3D views. So if we take a closer look at that, we can see our shape with an angle of 60 degrees. And then once it reaches the 1/2 inch point in height, it flattens off, so there's a flat top. Okay, so that's done as we've asked there, but instead of it being added onto our base component, I actually wanted it subtracted from it. So we can come over to the combine section, combine with other components, and instead of add, we're actually going to select subtract. And you'll see that that's now been sunk into the base shape rather than layered on top of it. Okay, so you can see those changes taking effect in the 3D view. So I'm just going to come over and I'm going to give this a name. So we'll call this recess, and we can click apply. And you can see those changes in the 3D view. So now we can start a new component from the Create Shape form by using this button here. And that means that we can remain in the form but start with a fresh shape. So next we're going to be looking at this circle here, and we're going to be creating a little bit of a dish shape in this area. So this time we want a rounded profile, so we'll use this option for curved profile. And this time we want the angle to be 45 degrees. We're going to limit the height again to 1/2 inch. And we're going to set the combine mode to subtract, and we'll give this a name. So we'll call this one dish, and then click apply. and then you'll see the effects of those changes in the 3D model. Okay, so I'm going to put that back into Z, and now we can close out of the create shapeform. And now I'd like to look at creating a texture which is going to sit in the recess of our sign. So to keep myself organised, I'm just going to come over to the component tree and minimise the base level, because we're done with that now. We're going to start with a new component of the design. So we're going to right click and we're going to look at inserting a new level. And then we can rename that. So we'll right click on the new level and we're going to give us a name. So we'll call that texture. And you can see that that's then selected in bold. So that means that anything we now create will be added into the new texture layer. So I now want to create a component that's based on a bitmap that I have. And the software has the ability to do that. So underneath the modeling tools on the second row, second icon in, you'll see the option create a component from selected or imported bitmap. So if we use that option, we can locate the project folder and you'll see that in there we have a coffee beans JPEG file. And if I then select that component and open it, the software will automatically convert that into a component. And we can see the 3D component placed on the model in the 3D view and the 2D grayscale representation of the model in the 2D view. And we can also see the component within the texture level of our component tree. Okay, so I want to size this up so that it fits within the outer circle that we've got here. And with this circle selected, I can see in the lower right hand corner of our screen that the circle has a width of 20 inches and a height of 20 inches. So I can now look at sizing our new component so that it fits within this circle. And to do that, with that object selected, we can go over to Transform Objects and Set Selected Object Size. And with X and Y linked, we're going to alter the height of this. So we're going to set that at 21 inches. And that way we know we're definitely clear in the circle. And with that set, we can then click Apply and we can close out of the set size form. And with the component still selected, I'm going to hold down Shift and select the circle as well and come back over to Transform Objects. And we're going to look at aligning our component to the center of the circle. So we'll use Align Selected Objects. And we want to align to selection and we want to align it in the center. So we'll use that option there. And you can see that's now taking effect in both views. So we can close out of the form. Now we can go into the 3D view to take a closer look at our texture component. So I'm just going to put that into the ISO view. And then using the scroll wheel of the mouse, I'm just going to zoom in on the texture. And we can see from this that we've got quite a lot of roughness there. Now, most images that you get will have quite a lot of noise in them. And this is all to do with the way that the images are compressed to make the file size smaller. But to reduce the effect of this now, we're going to be looking at applying a smoothing filter. And this can be found underneath the modeling tools again on the bottom row. And it's this icon here, Apply Smoothing Filter to Selected Components. Okay, so you can see once the form opens that we're now able to smooth that part. So we've got a slider here, which we can move to increase or decrease our smoothness. So we'll just bump that up. And we can see that's already had an effect there, but I still feel that that's a little rough. So I'm just going to set that to maximum smoothing. And that looks pretty good. So we can still see that we're representing coffee beans here, but we've just taken a bit of the noise out of the component. So we're happy with that now. So to accept that, we'll use Bake Current Smoothing, and that will commit those changes. And then once that's done, we can close out of the Smooth Components form. So we don't need to be zoomed in anymore, so I can put that back in Z. And now we're going to look at cropping our texture to the recess vectors. And so to do that, we'll click to select the component that we're looking to crop, and we'll shift and also select the vectors that we're looking to crop that component to. And with those selected, we can come over to the modeling tools again and use the tool Clear Area of Selected Component outside selected vectors. And that pretty much works just like a cookie cutter. So if we select that, and you'll see now that any part of the component that sits outside of these vectors has been deleted. But let's just go back into the 3D view to see how it's sitting within our recess shape. So you can see that we've got some interesting results here. So you can see that the texture is clearly adding on top of the base shape. Now, we want that texture to blend into the recessed shape, so we won't end up with all of these interesting shapes building on top. Because what we're seeing here is basically our textured shape adding onto the angled sides of the component. So let's take a moment to just look at our component tree. So we have our base level at the bottom, and this has the recess component inside. Now, above the base level, we have the texture level, which contains the coffee beans texture component. And that texture is set to add. So that texture is adding on to the base level, and therefore adding on top of anything that's sat within the base level. So in order to make the texture blend into the recessed shape, we just need to change the combine mode of the texture level. And so to do that, we right click on the texture level, go to combine mode, and we'll set that to merge instead of add. And you can see now that it's blending into the walls of the recessed shape, just as we expected. Okay, so one last thing I'd like to look at doing here is altering the shape height. So we've got a lot of height to these parts of the texture, so here and here. So we're just going to have a look at dropping the height of our coffee beans texture component. So with the component selected, we'll go up to the component properties under the modeling tools, and you can see at the moment we've got a shape height of 0.403 inches. So I'm just going to change that now to 0.2 of an inch, and we'll press the space bar to apply that, and you can see that we've now got a much more subtle effect. And we've really lowered the height of the component, but we've retained the coffee bean texture. Okay, so we can now close out of the form, and we'll just click in the blank space just to uncheck the coffee beans texture. Now the next part of this is to look at modelling the leaf motif. So before we do that, we'll just minimise the texture level, minimise the base level, and I'm just going to uncheck both to undraw them. We're then going to right click on the texture level and insert a new level, and we're going to rename that leaves. Okay, so I've switched the other two levels off because we're just going to be concentrating on the leaves here. And the first thing that we're going to look at is the berry shape. So with that then selected, we're going to go up to create a shape from vector outlines. And being a berry, we're going to want a rounded profile to that. So we'll choose the curved profile. We're going to go with an angle of 45 degrees again. And this time I know I want the height of this shape to be exactly 1/4 of an inch. So we can use the option scale to exact height, and we can enter 1/4 of an inch in there. And we need to give this one a name now, so we'll call that berry, and we can click apply, and we'll see the result of that in the 3D view added in. And then we can simply close out of the form. Okay, so next we're going to look at modelling the leaves. So you'll remember from the previous vector drawing tutorial that when we created these, we split the vectors in two in anticipation of using them with the 2-rail sweep tool. And we were going to use this vector here as the cross section. Okay, so to do that, we'll select the first vector there, and we'll hold down shift and select the right vector as well. And then we'll come up to the 2-rail sweep tool, go into the form. And so in here, because I've already selected my vectors, so I can click use selection. And we'll see now that the software's applied this with a red rail here, a green rail here. We've got the start point at the bottom, and they're both traveling up to this point here, which is correct. But in some cases, you can find that these rails are reversed, so you'll have one going in the opposite direction. And to change that, all you'd need to do is right click on the rail and use the first option, reverse rail, to swap that around. But as I don't need to do that in this case, I can click off, and all I need to do now is select my cross section. So for that, I'm going to be using this vector here. So I'll hold down shift and I'll click to select that, and we can go ahead and press apply. Okay, so we can just take a look to see what we've got in the 3D view. So I'll just zoom in there. Okay, so once again, just like the texture we created, it's adding on the top. So we just need to change the combine mode to merge in with the berry component, and you'll see that change taking place there. And you'll also see that it's maintaining the height consistently throughout. So because this is an organic shape, what we'd like to do is to scale the cross sections against the width of our 2 rails. So that would mean that where we've got greater width between the 2 rails, we'd have more height, and where they're closer together, we'd have less height. And to do that, we can take a look at using this option here, scale cross sections with width. And I'm also going to look at scaling it to an exact height of 1/4 of an inch. And if we then go ahead and click apply, we can see the changes there in the 3D view. So there now we've got a much more natural shape where we're not maintaining the height throughout, and it's purely scaling about the width of the two rails. Okay, so I can put the 3D view back into Z here, and we can come over to the component and we'll give that a name. So we'll call that leaf, and we can simply click apply and then close out of the form. And for the 2D view, we'll just zoom the active view to the drawing limits. And what we can look at doing now is just taking that leaf and creating a mirrored copy of it below the berry. And to do that, first I'm going to need a guideline. So we're just going to go back into the drawing tab and we'll select the polyline tool. And because the berry is already placed in the midpoint of the circle, we can snap to that point there, bring it across and snap to that point there on the inner circle, and we can right click to accept it, and we'll just zoom on the berry here. And we can see now that we've got a line that's going straight through the center point of the berry, which is going to help me when I look to copy the leaf to the other side. So we'll just go ahead and do that now. So we're going to select the leaf, and we're also going to hold shift and select the line. And then under transform objects, we use the mirror tool, and we'll see in the form that we've got this option to flip about line. But first, just to make sure that we also keep the original copy, we want to click create a mirrored copy, and then we can select the option to flip about line, and you can see that it's then done that there for us. And with that done, we can close out of the form, and we'll just zoom to fit again on the 2D view. And the final thing that we need to do to complete our leaf motif is to create a copy on the right hand side of the design. So to do that, we're going to want to make sure we've got all three components selected. So we've already got that leaf, so we'll hold down shift and select the berry and the original copy. And we can then go back into the mirror selected objects tool, and we're going to flip about the job center. We're going to create a mirrored copy, and we're then going to flip that horizontally. And again, in the 3D view, you can see that it's created a copy over to the right hand side. So we can close out of the form, and we're now going to go back into our modeling tab. And we can see from our views here, we've got the 3D components displayed here. In the 2D view, we've got the grayscale representation of them. And then over in our component tree, we have our leaves layer, and we can see that we've got a berry, a leaf, and then we've got copies of these with a number in brackets next to them. And this shows that these are duplicates of an existing component in the tree. Okay, so we'll just click into the blank space to deselect everything. And we're now going to switch back on our texture and base layers. And we can take a look now in the 3D view to see how our leaves are being displayed in the composite model. And we can see that the texture of the coffee beans is actually showing through the leaves. And that's not actually what we're going for here. So we want the texture to sit in the background, and we want the leaves to sit in the foreground, proud of the texture. So again, to check the relationship between these components, we can go back over to the components tree, and we'll see that the leaves level is adding over the top of the texture. And as a result, the texture is showing through, so we can see it on top of our leaf components. And to change this, we can just right click on the leaves level, go into the combine mode, and we're going to set that to merge with our composite model. Okay, so you can see that's getting close to what we're looking for, but we are losing a part of the leaf to the texture. So what I need to do is raise the height of these leaves, and rather than applying a base height to each one of them individually, what I can do instead is look to apply a base height to the overall level, and that will then enable us to lift the leaves so they sit proud of the texture. So we'll select the leaves level now, and we'll go back into the component properties form, and we can just look at incrementally increasing the base height until we've got enough for the complete design to show through. So we'll start with 0.05, hit the spacebar to check that. And that's looking good, but we've still got some areas where they're sitting below this texture. So we'll jump straight to, let's say, 0.2 of an inch. And that's looking great. So we can see the entire leaf, they're sitting proud of the texture, but they're still sitting within this recessed area, so they're not exceeding the height of the border here. And we've achieved that just by increasing the base height of the level itself, which means that everything within this level is then built up on top of this 0.2 base height. Okay, so that's that area complete, so we can put the 3D view back in Z and we'll close out of the component properties. So now we're going to look at modelling the coffee beans that are going to sit inside of our dish shape. So first we'll minimise out of the leaves level and we'll right click on that, insert a new level, and we're going to right click again and we're going to rename that coffee beans. Okay, so with that level now the active level, we can carry on and start making our shapes. So we're going to start with the background bean and we're going to use the create shape tool again. So we'll select the vector, come back up into the form, and again we want to be using a curved profile for this, and this time we're going to use an angle of 90 degrees. And moving down the form, we're going to scale it to an exact height again, and we've currently got that set at 1/4 of an inch, but because this is sitting in the background, I'm just going to lower that slightly. So we'll set that at 0.2 inches. We're going to set the combine mode of this one to merge, and we'll call this bean. And we can go ahead and click apply, and then you'll see the result of that there in the 3D view. Okay, so that's looking great now. So we can now have a look at modelling the bean in the foreground. So from the create shape form again, we can start a new component to remain in the form. And we're going to select the vectors of the foreground bean. Again, we're going to be using a curved profile with an angle of 90 degrees. We're going to scale the height this time to, we'll put that back to 1/4 of an inch, just so this sits in the foreground, so it's got prominence over the bean in the background. We're going to leave the combine mode on merge, and we can give this one a name, so we'll call this one top bean, and we'll click apply again. And after doing that, if we look over in the 3D view, we can see that part of the top bean is actually being obscured by the bean in the background. And as I mentioned earlier, I want to create the impression that this bean is in the foreground, so in front of the bean in the background. I'm happy with the shape height here, so we've got a nice domed profile going on, but we just need to sort this area out here so we can see the full bean in the foreground. So we just need to look at lifting this part here, the top bit, just to make sure that it looks like it's overlapping and sitting in front of the bean in the background. And to do that, we can look at applying a tilt in the create shape form. And the tilt is a bit like applying an angled base height, so you can see that in this image here. So first of all, if I click to select the tilt, and we can click set for the set anchor tool, and then over in the 2D view, we can click to set our anchor point. So we're going to look at setting our anchor point at the bottom of the bean here. So you always want to set that first anchor point where you least want to increase the base height. So I'll click to place that there, and then once I've done this, you'll see that I've now got this cursor that is being pulled from that first anchor point. And this is how we can choose the angle of our tilt. So we're going to want it in this direction, so it's over the center of the bean. And once we click to accept that second anchor point, that means the tilt will be applied in that direction. And once this is done, we can then use the slider, which is next to the set anchor tool, to increase or decrease the angle of the tilt. So we'll just have a look in the 3D view. So we can see at the moment that we've got a massive tilt on this. So it's set at an angle of 20 degrees, and that's given us almost a vertical wall at the back end of this front bean. So we can look to decrease this now. So we can reduce that vertical wall down just so it's coming over the bottom of the back bean. So we'll have a look at reducing that with the slider. So I'll just bring it down just in increments until I'm happy. Just a little bit more. Okay, so that's looking good, but we've still got a tiny lip here. So we'll just have a look to see what 3 degrees looks like. We can input that manually. And we can click space to select that. And that's actually now looking perfect. So we've created enough height there just to make it appear as though this bean's in the foreground, but we haven't created too much so we've got a big vertical lip in that area. And I'm happy with that now, so we can go ahead and start a new component. So we'll select that again. And now we're going to look at creating this crease on the top of the front bean. So we'll select that vector. And looking at the parameters in our form, this time we're going to go for an angled profile. And because we want it to look like the crease in a coffee bean, we want it to subtract into this component here. And we also want it to be quite a steep angle. Okay, so we're going to set the angle at 45 degrees this time. We don't want to limit the final height. And most importantly, we want to set the combine mode to subtract this time. And we can go ahead and give that one a name. So we'll call this one crease. And we can go ahead and click apply. And then we can see that applied in the 3D view. And I think that's looking pretty close to an actual coffee bean now. So I'm happy with that. We can put that back into Z and we can close out of the create shapeform. And now taking a full overview of our complete design here, there is one thing that I'd like to do with the crease that we've just created is just to nudge it down slightly so it appears like the front bean is rolled on its side slightly. So to do that, we've got the vector still selected, and we're also going to want to select the component that we've created from that. So we'll hold down Shift and we'll click to select both. And I'm just going to click again on the combination of both of them to put that into transform mode. And by using the directional arrows on the keyboard, we can just nudge this about very slightly. So I just want to move it down, so I'll hit the down arrow on the keyboard and you'll see that that's just very slightly lowered the crease. So I'm a lot happier with that layout now. It looks like we've got more of a view at the top of this front bean. So with that sorted, I'm going to click to maximize the 3D view now. And we'll just take a moment just to have a look over this bean design as a complete part. And it's not until I've maximised this view and zoomed in that I've realised that the bean in the background has almost got lost inside the dish, so it's lacking that shape height. So what we can do is look at applying a tilt to a group of components, so the two beans together. And the first thing that we're going to need to do before doing that is to group these three components together. So I'm going to take the bean, holding down Shift, the top bean and the crease. And then I'm going to right click on all three and we're going to go down to this option to group them together. And you'll see a new header has been created here in the list called Bean Group. And you'll see that within that tree, under the bean group, we've still got those original individual components. Okay, and this is just a way to make the software just see a combination of individual components as a single entity. So I'll just minimize that group and we can come over to the 3D view and we'll just double click the component and you'll see that we can click anywhere and it will select all three in that group. And once we've selected them, we can click again to put them into transform mode, and we'll see at the bottom of the bounding points around the components a blue point. And if we click on that point, we'll be presented with a floating component properties box. And this is really convenient for making edits to components from within the 3D view without having to move backwards and forwards over to the modeling tools. So just like we did earlier, we're going to click to select the tilt. We're going to choose our set anchor tool. And I'm just going to set my first anchor point here, so you can see we've got number 1 next to the anchor. And now we need to set our second. We'll see that it's changed to 2 next to the anchor, and we'll set that up there so it's in that direction. So I've set it in this diagonal direction, so following the angle of the beans themselves. And now we can just look at setting an angle with the slider. So I'll just give that a small increase there. And we can have a look at that in the 3D view. So we can see that was quite a large tilt there. So we've got these vertical lips again. So I'll just bring that down using the slider again, just to see if we can get something more acceptable. Maybe just a little bit more. So I'll probably look to just enter that in on the keyboard. So we'll just try a value of 1 degree. Press spacebar to accept that. And you can see that that's quite a nice amount of lift now. So it's not being washed into the background. It's got a bit of base height behind it just to make sure that it's prominent against the bottom of this dish here. So that's looking great. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So I can close out of the floating component properties. And the last thing that I'm going to do to this group is to apply smoothing to it. And with the group still selected, we can come back over to the modeling tools and at the bottom choose the smoothing tool. And we'll see that Aspire's actually flagged up a warning telling us that this component must be baked before editing. And the reason that it's doing that is because it's picked up that we're working with a group of components here. And it can only apply a smooth filter to baked objects. So we can click OK and that will actually accept that and bake it for us. So I'm happy with how those components are looking, so I can go ahead and do that. But that does mean that we can no longer access the individual components of this group because they're now baked into one entity. So if you wanted to go back and edit again at this stage, you would have to undo the bake operation. Okay, so in the smooth filter, we're just going to look at applying a very small amount here, so maybe at around the 25% mark. So that's just enough just to knock off those hard edges there. And then to commit those changes, we can bake the current smoothing and then close out of the smooth components form. Okay, so at this stage, I just want to check that the height of the beans isn't coming over the top of the disc shape. Okay, so what we can do is just select the bean baked group, and we're just going to rename this just to simplify it to coffee beans. And then with it selected, we're just going to go back into the component properties. And in the form, we can see that we've currently got a shape height of 0.4906. And we don't want this component to come any higher than the 1/2 inch that we set our base height to here. And we can see that it's just under here, but it's on the line. So we'll just decrease that very slightly to 0.48. And we'll click spacebar to apply, and we can close out of the form. And to make sure that none of the other components are coming over the 1/2 inch base height of this flat area here, what we can do is use this option, scale Z height of model, and we can see that the current highest point of the model is 1/2 inch, which is this flat here. But if this was displaying any higher, then we'd need to look at the individual components and reduce the height of those. Okay, so we don't need to do anything there, so we can just cancel out of the form. And now we're ready to model in the last part of our design, which is the fresh coffee text. So if we just put this back into horizontal view, and we're going to minimize this level, and we're going to right click to insert a new level, and then right click to rename that, and we're going to call this one fresh coffee. And with that selected, that's now the active level. So we're going to come over to the 2D view. We're going to click to select the fresh text, and then holding down shift, we're going to select the coffee text as well. And then we're going to come back up to the create a shape from vector outlines. And this time for the text, I'm going to want an angle profile. I'm going to select an angle of 75 degrees. And I do want to limit the height of this, and I want to limit it to 0.4 of an inch. So that means that when the shape gets to 0.4 of an inch in height, it will then flatten off. And we're going to give this a name, so we'll call this one text. We can go ahead and press apply, and then we can close out the form. So looking at the text that we've created, we can see again that the texture of the coffee beans is transmitting through to the top of the shapes. And that's just down to the fact that our fresh coffee text is currently adding on top of the other levels and components in our component tree. And so to resolve this, again, we can right click on the layer and go to combine mode, and instead we're going to select merge so that it blends in with the rest of the components in our composite model. And now you can see that the top of the text is now very smooth flat. But the last thing that I want to do here is just to add very slight smoothing to the text. So we'll go ahead and select the text component again, and we'll go back into the smooth filter, and we'll look to add again very minimal smoothing, so around 25%, same as we added to the coffee beans. And that's looking great. That's just smoothed off those edges, so we've still got very bold, prominent text on there, which is sitting proud of the texture in the background. So we can bake current smoothing to accept that. And then with that done, we can close out of the smooth components form. And now that we've just created a new set of components, we just need to go back in and double check our Z heights of our model. So we can see here that we haven't gone over the 1/2 inch of the flat area here, so I'm very happy with that. And we can cancel out of the form. And with that, the 3D modelling of our fresh coffee sign is complete. So we can go ahead and save the file now. So we can go to File, Save As. And in the project folder, we're going to call this one Magic Beans Coffee Sign 3D Modelling. And we can click Save. And that's now ready to be accessed for toolpathing at a later point, which is covered in a related toolpathing tutorial, which you can find through the related video sections on this page.